Go ahead and call the meeting of the Willmar City Council to order for the work session. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak during the work session portion of the meeting? Go ahead. Yep. And your name and if you live in the city or outside of the city. And this is the work session where we're talking about community ed and rec, partnership between school district, cable technician, and the fund balance policy review.
Can I speak towards the welcoming resolution?
You could speak towards that now if you wish to, or that is on the agenda for the regular meeting, which is on at 7 o'clock.
I would just speak now if that's all right.
That's fine.
So I'm Pastor Steve Meyer, Eagle Lake Lutheran, just outside of Willmar. Not a Willmar resident, Willmar address, but outside of the city limits. I want to say that I wish that we weren't talking about a welcoming resolution in Willmar. But I think it's absolutely essential that we are, for a whole variety of reasons. And I think the climate has changed, not just in Willmar, but in a lot of places. And I could talk about a lot of the reasons why that climate has changed that are probably fairly obvious. But I think about some things that have happened over the past year or so. I think about being on vacation last January and having to deal with a viral message on Facebook or whatever saying that Willmar is being taken over by, quote, Muslims, and having to answer an aunt from Iowa wondering if this is true. And I think about participating in a very peaceful march last February up and down Main Street of Willmar, protesting the Muslim ban, protesting building a wall on our border, and being harassed by people in the community for taking part in an extremely peaceful march, and then having some very evil things said about my family, my church, on the internet as a result of that. I think about recent Facebook issues. I think about state legislators implying that training people to participate in caucuses is a bad thing, citizens. And I think, as I said before, I wish we weren't talking about a welcoming resolution, but I hope we're talking about even way more than that. So I hope this welcoming resolution is a landslide and a step towards what we can further do in this community to not just say we're welcoming to all of our neighbors, but to do everything we can to live that out. And so I thank you for letting me have a chance to speak. I wanted to call all of you this week and just express my hopes that you would vote in favor of it, but just didn't have the time to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have remote attendance at city council meetings. Mr. Robert Scott, our city attorney, is going to address this. There's been some questions recently about how we could do this, and I've had conversations with a couple city council members, and I thought we could do it, and it appears that we can, and so our city attorney will share that process with us, how, if we want to do that as a council, it's allowed under state statute, but more importantly, then how we do that to stay within the confines of the open meeting law. So, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. It is allowed to conduct meetings by interactive TV under the open meeting law. There is no formal action the council needs to take to authorize that to happen. You're authorized to do it already under state statute. This is something I think I might have touched on in my presentation earlier this winter on the open meeting law, or last fall, I guess it was, but not in much detail. But the way it works is essentially the program we've used successfully in other cities is Skype. That meets the qualifications or the requirements for interactive TV. I'm sure there are other programs that work, but Skype seems to be the most frequently used and has worked well. And any one member or multiple members can attend a meeting and have full participation and voting rights in the meeting if they meet a couple requirements. And the requirements are basically just that the council member or members that are attending remotely be visible on a screen in the regular meeting room. So everyone in this meeting would have to be able to observe the council member who's participating remotely by interactive TV. And conversely, the regular meeting room would have to be visible to the member participating remotely. And that seems to have worked. We haven't done it in Willmar, but we've helped some other cities do it, and it seems to have worked well. There's notice requirements. The public needs to be notified before the meeting takes place that at least one member will be participating remotely. And both locations or all locations where any member is going to be present and participating in the meeting, including the regular meeting room, obviously, but then any remote location have to be open to the public. So you can't meet with a closed door wherever you are, even if you're halfway around the world and decide to participate in a meeting. In theory, it has to be open to the public. So those are basically the requirements, and certainly it can take some questions. Like I said, there's no formal action the council needs to take to do that. I think the request would be simply that if a member is interested in doing that for a future meeting, you give staff and our office notice of that at maybe one meeting cycle in advance. So if you wanted to attend the second council meeting in a month, notify staff at the first meeting or sooner so that logistics can be worked out and notice requirements can be satisfied. Are there any questions about that?
Councilman Rasmus.
Are these laptops capable of Skyping? Is the camera active?
Ross, do you know? You just happen to have our IT guy with.
I know.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, the tablets are currently capable of doing video conferencing via Skype. However, these chambers themselves are not. That would require a complete system upgrade in order to do video conferencing. And until an assessment's done, I'm not certain what those costs would be.
Okay. Mr. Maskey.
Is the county building capable of Skype?
I believe it is.
Okay. And if I'm on Skype at a remote location, do I have to have sound and capabilities because it's public? Or can you, because some places are quite noisy, could you have headphones in and so on, or does, because it's a public meeting, somebody has to be able to hear what is going on?
Everyone in the regular meeting room would have to be able to hear you participate if you chose to participate.
I understand that on my end. On the other end, they don't need to hear necessarily what other people are saying?
Be in your location,
Right.
if you're in a noisy location, I don't think that's true.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Nelson, followed by Alvarado.
Just a question. I know I had thought about doing this when I was gone in December and gave it up for a couple logistic kinds of things. But the fact that we're live on Rack 8, there isn't a way to combine technology to use. I mean, I could watch the meeting where I was at through the internet. So is Skype our only option? And the second part of that question is I've taken some concerns about our work session not being live, and I know that we're capable of doing that, and so I'm just curious as we look at this, if we were going to be gone and wanted to participate in the work session, is there some way to accommodate both of that and for us to have the work session live?
Let me start with the first question on that. No, we could not combine the current video recording capabilities here as a live video conference on it. That would require a separate system. There are other video conferencing systems besides Skype. Skype's kind of the standard on it. And yes, you could participate, or we could do the work session live. It would require additional staff since we actually have a staff member here and at RAC doing the session whenever it's live. For recording capabilities, we just need one staff member.
So,
Additional comments?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I didn't actually realize you didn't have the capabilities in this room. I naively assumed that you could since we had seen the internet work at previous demonstrations. I will obviously defer to staff on that. Legally, You know, if the technical capabilities exist in your regular meeting room, you're legally able to do it, provided you satisfy the notice requirements I talked about.
I mean, we probably could be as simple as setting up another Skype unit, right?
Yeah,
Setting up a Skype unit over on at your corner,
possibly. I mean,
possibly, right? Councilman Alvarado?
You said that there were some other councils currently doing this. Now, the person that's off-site, what have they used as a public forum where have they set up? In a lobby of a hotel? What kind of setups have you seen?
in my experience, it's actually been their private hotel rooms, and what they have to do in that situation is actually keep their room door open and post something in the lobby of their hotel. And it seems kind of ridiculous to think, because seriously, this has happened when they've been out of the country. But, in theory, if there were someone that were interested in observing them conduct or participate in the meeting of their local government, they would have to be able to go into the room and watch them conduct their meeting.
What's the placard that they create? What does it say? Open meeting law, room 201,
Don't quote me on it verbatim. It says something to the effect of participating in meeting of the city of blank city council meeting will take place in room whatever from 7 o'clock on, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
So I've done this in a position that I previously held, and it's as simple as just placing a notice or in a public place, and then I always set just in a public place, either at a coffee shop or sometimes I go to a city hall or a courthouse or a library, and then just put a notice out. But the notice has to be at the front of the building from what I remember. Right.
In an accessible place to the
Yep,
public.
where people normally would see it, right. Yeah, you can't post it on your door on the third floor and say it's public, so, right. Okay, additional questions? Councilman Rasmus?
On the agenda report that we received, at the very bottom, under subdivision 5, it talks about school boards' interactive technology with an audio and visual link. Why is that on there?
It's a state.
Why are school boards carved out with
Yeah.
that? I don't actually know.
Okay, I just thought that was
I'm not sure
odd.
what that addresses that the rest of the statute doesn't, or what additional authority that's granting, but.
Okay.
Okay. So, the only other thing that I would say is that there have been some cities that have done this, and then what happens is their council members decide to stay home rather than come to the council meeting. And so I would think that if we're going to do this, we'd want to establish some type of a policy that only X number of those meetings could be attended remotely. I think it was Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center. Maybe you can look that up, Robert.
Sure.
I mean, Mr. Scott. But they were having a problem where the majority of their meetings, they didn't have a quorum present other than remotely. So, they had talked about enacting a policy that you could only miss X number of meetings, so, that might be something we want to look at.
Yeah, and I'll add just on that note that to the extent we've helped cities with it, it has been it's been a rare occurrence when a member has wanted to participate remotely, and it's usually because it's an important meeting and the member simply cannot be present because they're out of town.
Right.
And I'd expect that would be the circumstances the council would want to consider doing that here.
Sure. Councilman Meske?
Just your comment about a quorum, a person who is going to attend via video would still count as a quorum, yes?
Correct.
All right. So the fact that they didn't have a physical quorum shouldn't restrict us. But I do like the idea of restricting the number of meetings. I think that would be a good idea if we explore this.
Okay. So we need to give some direction to staff. Is this something that we want staff to work on a little bit? And then is there a recommendation on how many meetings could be attended remotely per council member per year? Or do we want to do it per quarter? The problem I have of doing it per quarter is if you have a council member who chooses to travel for a winter vacation and you say you can only have 2 per quarter and they're in Mexico for, 3 months, that doesn't allow them to remotely participate. Councilmember Schwantes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder if, rather than giving a number, if it wouldn't be better to say given an unusual circumstance or some other language. Let's say someone is in an accident and they're laid up and unable to get here because of physical limitations, but yet want to be able to participate. I wouldn't want to take them out of that opportunity. So is there other language that conveys that fulfills the same intent without limiting the number?
Mr. Scott, I think you probably have the intent of the council, and maybe you can draft something for us and get it back to us. That'd be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next, I'm sorry, Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious, does this open the door to the public speaking through Skype?
No.
No, there's nothing about this that would expand the rights the council has decided to give the public to speak at council meetings. This is simply for council member participation, and the open meeting law requires that the public be able to observe both the members of the body that are in the regular room and any that are participating remotely.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have a community ed and rec presentation. Mr. Brizendine.
Mayor Calvin, members of the council, it's my pleasure to be here tonight to present the 2017 annual report to the city council, staff, and residents of the city and school district. So what you're going to see is a PowerPoint with mostly 2017 numbers related to it. So we'll get started. Cody, are you going to keep up with me, or do you want me to do it? All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. 2017 was I think a very successful year for us. As you all know, this is a collaboration between the city of Willmar and Willmar Public Schools to provide programming around community education and recreation services. This is our 2017 was our 17th year of providing these services collaboratively. We'll start youngest to oldest, I think, is how this might be set up. So our early childhood programs, school-based programs, we've got 3 different services that we provide. Oh. Didn't trust me, did you? Early childhood family education.
I was just going to tell you if you didn't move.
Yeah, exactly. Early childhood family education is a parent and child together programming. We offered 51 classes last year with 331 children participating, along with 382 of their parents. 56 events, over 1,300 children and 1,200 adults participated in those 56 special events. Our school readiness program is what we most commonly call our preschool program, 3 to 5-year-olds. 156 children served, mostly at Jefferson, but we also have a remote site at Kennedy Elementary School. And in conjunction with the programming that we do through the district, we also have Head Start programming at Jefferson. We've got an all-day program there, along with a collaborative program between our programs and the Head Start program. And then early childhood screening, a developmental check for those youngsters prior to kindergarten. By state law, you have to be screened before entering kindergarten. Last year, we screened 163-year-olds, 144-year-olds, and 73 5-year-olds. Next year, programming is very similar to this year. Next year, it's our goal to move the preschool programs into the 3 elementary schools. Youth enrichment and recreation programs, we serve just under 8,000 preschool to 18-year-olds in community ed and rec programming, spanning youth service programs to the baseballs and softballs and all the programs that go along with summer recreation. a pretty well-rounded program that we get a lot of involvement, a lot of volunteer coaches, a lot of school district coaches coaching our young people. So as you can see, we served a lot of young people in 2017. Our Child Guide program, I believe this is the 9th year that the Child Guide program has been a part of Willmar Community Education and Recreation. Their purpose is to serve children in the school district. We've got a child guide at each one of the 3 elementary schools. This year we just hired one when Lakeland opened at the start of the year. Lexi Wilbin is our latest child guide, along with Leah Thorpe and Heidi Burton. Do a wonderful job of serving students and trying to put them into asset development activities like after-school programs. They connect them to adult mentorships via programs like Rotary Readers and Lunch Buddies. Very strong program over the last, I think it goes back 16 to 18 years with Ridgewater College and Ridgewater College students going down to the elementary schools and having Lunch Buddies there. That I think is just a fabulous opportunity for both sides of that equation, the students at the elementary schools, but even more so the college students. I think that's a great program. Cardinal Place is our school-age care program. We serve 194 students last summer in our program, and this year 254 students are currently attending Cardinal Place. Again, before and after school, we're open from 6:30 in the morning till 6 p.m. School days, obviously, we shut down right before school and open up right after school. A very good program for the residents of our community. They need a place when parents are working. Most of us know that both parents this day and age are working members of the community. So this is a quality, safe place for our young people before mom and dad get home from work. Our adult basic education program is a 10-school consortium. Willmar is the fiscal host for this consortium. The 10 school districts, I'm going to press myself and see if I can do it or not, but New London Spicer, Belgrade, Bruton, El Rosa, Paynesville, Litchfield, Dassel-Cokato, Hutchinson, KMS, and Atwater, Cosmos Grove City, I think, are the districts that make up that, and KMS I did say, along with Willmar. We served 1,322 students last year with over 60,000 hours of education provided to those learners. The bulk of that program is Willmar. Willmar makes up about 60+% of the hours and students. Our next largest is Hutchinson School District, which is about 25% of the program. So a very valid program, provides a lot of services to those that did not get through their high school years. Adult enrichment and recreation. Almost 3,500 adults participated in rec programming and enrichment programming last year, everything from exercise classes to the adult leagues that are still very popular within our community. Softball in the summer, we've got basketball and volleyball going on right now along with hockey, so just under 3,500 adults participating with us and acting like children on many nights. Aquatics, a very strong program that's helped out by having some quality facilities in our community. 2 indoor pools at the high school and middle school. We've got the Aquatic Center, and then Robbins Island Beach is where the majority of our programming takes place. We offered 123 classes for swim lesson participants last year with just over 500 registered participants. The Aquatic Center last year had just under 15,000 attendees. Did a number of special events and aquatic programs last year. I would be remiss if I didn't point out the Fit Mat Yoga, which is fairly new to the community and the area around fitness. I made it through 4 classes without dunking myself on that, so I think it's a feat amongst itself that they really can balance themselves, so go ahead and give it a whirl someday. Civic Center, as you know, a very well utilized facility. We had some construction projects take place this year. We updated all the bathrooms. We put a new steel roof on the Cardinal Arena, a new sound system in the Cardinal Arena, and then the parking lot was seal coated and striped. Lots of user hours. Youth hockey, 411 hours. The high school, 400 hours. The Warhawks, 270 hours of ice time. Figure skating, 260 hours. Curling club, 145 hours. Down the list, we've got open hockey and skating through Community Ed and Rec. We've got a youth hockey program that serves a number of young hockey players, up-and-coming hockey players. Open curling's been very well attended. We've got 2 adult hockey leagues. One's a Christian hockey league that plays on Sunday nights, and then our Community Ed and Rec program plays on Wednesday nights. We hosted 13 dry floor events this year. You see the events themselves. We've lost a couple over the last couple of years. Rob and Beth Fisher are doing a good job of trying to replace those and come up with new opportunities. So I think that facility has been well utilized. The ice refrigeration project that will come up in the council agenda later will potentially provide us with more opportunities to get ice time and rental at that facility year-round, filling in some of the gaps that we're not currently able to do programming at. I lost a picture here. Mr. Technology failed again. Bottom line is the Willmar Community Center, and I think we had a little report to our Community Ed and Rec advisory group last week. That's in your minutes. There's a lot of programs. Darlene Schrader and the board have put together a number of wonderful free opportunities out there, mostly free opportunities around music and programming pieces as listed here. The dining site is still located there. I think this is about the 12th year that they moved to the community center from the VFW. On a daily basis, I think it's somewhere around 20 to 25 meals are served on a daily basis, with $2 Wednesdays being the highlight, when they do a much better job with attendance. We've had a number of exercise classes take place out there. We've had some health screenings and health fairs. We started doing day trips again recently, and there's just a plethora of rentals available out there. Facility management runs through Community Ed and Rec. We take care of all school facilities and public facilities for the city of Willmar as well, including the auditorium. We've got 18 ball fields that we schedule in the summertime. The band shell, any use of the band shell runs through us. Robbins Island and the parks, 9 shelters in total around the community. With Rice Park getting the new update this year, we fully anticipate a lot of usage with a number of birthday parties and things like that taking place at that facility. The Civic Center is somewhat of a standalone, as Rob Baumgarn handles that, and then the Willmar Community Ed and Community and Activity Center. It's actually just the community center now. We fielded just under 500 requests for use of facilities, and over 150,000 people last year participated in activities, public facilities. Park development was a active opportunity for us last year in our department. 3 parks got a lot of resources and time spent on things that are going to take place. Obviously, Robbins Island Regional Park with the playground getting installed there last year. We also received word that we had received the grant from the DNR Legacy dollars. Rice Park, the picture that you see is of Rice Park, just about completed. We've got landscaping to do in the spring, and then that facility will be ready to be opened hopefully by 20th of May, roughly. We were very successful in getting grants. A year ago, in preparation for the playground project, we wrote grants for the Willmar Area Community Foundation for $50,000, the Otto Bremer Foundation for $150,000. We received a little over $10,000 from District 5950, the Rotary District in town, to do the entrance project this spring. And then, as I just said, the DNR Legacy Grant for $606,000. Paperwork's just being completed for that with some project approval from some entities that the DNR requests that you go through. Miller Park, the work for Miller Park this year with 4 tennis court addition. We received a couple of grants, so one from the USTA Northern Region and then the National USTA to help us complete that project. We've got playground equipment ready to be installed at that site, and at a future council work session, we'll have to bring some thoughts of the park system and where the extra unit, we've got one playground unit for 5 to 12-year-olds that has not been designated on where to be installed this spring. So working with the playground installer on where that might take place, we'll get some drawings put together and let you folks weigh in on where you think the priority is for that playground unit to be installed. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you for your report, Mr. Brizendine. I would be amiss because Councilmember Plowman is not here, but, you know, he's going to want that playground in his area because that's what he keeps saying. So I know if he was here, he would say that. So council, any questions for Mr. Brizendine? Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Steve, for your report. You know, back in the day when I was growing up, we didn't have a community ed, we had a recreation department. And all the baseball teams, softball teams, soccer, whatever it may be, were sponsored by companies. I mean, our company sponsored teams. And I wondered if we shouldn't go back to that to help defray some costs for these. I mean, kids used to play, you know, Perkins Lumber, Standard Lumber. The Willmar Police Department had a team, and there was always rivalry. And I wonder if we couldn't do that to help defray some of the costs. Is that possible, or is there something holding us back from doing that?
No, I think it's been, you know, like you said, it's been a number of years. It's probably been a little over 20 years since we reached out to the businesses to just do the sponsorship of even the shirts that the kids get. As you said, there's a fair amount of dollars spent on that resource, for those resources. So certainly as you look at budgets and what you want to do regarding programming, there are some opportunities for us to explore some partnerships. I think we've done a lot of that around the volunteer coaches, and that's been a strong history for the city of Willmar, the volunteer coaches and how they step to the plate and defer a number of the payroll cost, support staff cost through the volunteerism. So I think there are some opportunities for some future growth in that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, thank you for your report. Appreciate it. I have one last question. I thought you were going to get away without a question.
Well, you can't say thank you for your report and then add a last question. I think that should have come before you said thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask
Mr.
the question and I'll thank you again. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Lifeguards. I've been having some people contact me wondering how to apply to be lifeguards for next summer. So maybe you could just go over that process and what they need to have, if you know. I think it's encouraging that there's people out there that are interested in doing lifeguarding because they know it's a lot of work to get to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just can't show up on, you know, July 1st and say I want a lifeguard on July 2nd. So it's
No,
not the way it
that's
is
exactly
anymore.
right. First requirement is you have to be 15 years old. We do our lifeguard training for those 15 and above. You have to take a certified class. Pam Verwink is our aquatics coordinator, so she would lead the young people through that process. Bottom line, if you're interested in that, you can either visit our website or call our office and talk to Pam Verwink, but applications for positions are online. We are going through a new registration program that we'll give some updates on as we get into that process later this spring that hopefully will streamline and make more of the information available online for people. So we think it's going to be a lot more consumer friendly than the current program that we're using for registrations, and hopefully connect to our website and other opportunities more diligently so that the public has a little better or easier access to the things that we do. But bottom line, for lifeguards, must be 15 years old and take a lifeguard certification class. And if I remember correctly, that's somewhere around 30 hours.
Thank you. Thank you for your report.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Next is a partnership agreement between Willmar Public Schools and the city. And there's a request to forward this to the meeting, to the full council meeting tonight. Mr. Holland.
Mayor and council, tonight this is on the agenda, and as the mayor said, I hope to have this on the agenda tonight for a recommendation of approval This document and this process was brought to me early on when I arrived last summer, and so I've been working with Dr. Holm on this and Steve Brizendine and our city attorney and a few other people on this document. I would just say, first of all, that I was impressed with this document being in place because of a lot of communities do not share assets for recreation. And not to give you the whole speech, but basically this document allows for one-stop shopping for families when they want to play baseball or soccer or swimming, different activities. And so that's one of the reasons I really like the document. Now, having said that, Dr. Holm and myself had several discussions, I would say, over the last 6 months, at least 6, if not 8, different meetings about this document. Over the course of the last 6 months, we worked on this document. We had our attorneys review this document. We had input from his board. We had input from this council. And it was approved by the school board in December. And so tonight, I'm recommending also approval for this document. I sent this document out back in the fall to all the council members in October, I want to say, and asked for input. And then on January 18th, I sent this document out with the changes that were made for input. And so tonight, I have Dr. Holm here. We have, you just heard from Steve Brizendine. We've got our city attorney and myself. Also, Council Member Nelson has been involved in the discussions over the last 6 months about this document and this agreement. I will also say that the school board, I believe everyone approved it except one member when they voted for this agreement. Now, the key change to it, I guess I'll answer one question to myself that I think everyone, what's the change, Ike? What's the big difference? The difference is right on the first page where it says this is the CE&R Advisory Committee, not the Joint Powers Board. And if you go through this document, what we've attempted to do is clarify and define the roles of this advisory committee. And one of the observations that I've had, and I think Dr. Holm would agree, that the role of the Joint Powers Board, now the Advisory Committee, was a lack of understanding of their mission and their role in this Joint Powers Agreement. And so that's what we've tried to attempt to clarify. And this also includes, just so you know, myself and Dr. Holm talking to the Joint Powers Board on one occasion and answering their questions and trying to get an understanding between the two bodies, the city body and the school district body, as far as our roles. And with that, like I said, we're all here to take questions tonight and join in the discussion. And so I'll leave it with that.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Just for the members of the public and Dr. Holm and others, this is the first time this has come to the council to discuss at the table. We've had the information sent to us, but we have not had a conversation at this table. And I know that I've had conversations with a number of different council members in regards to this, and I know that there are concerns in regards to it. So with that, council, I'll ask what your questions are, and we'll try to get them addressed. Councilmember Nelson.
So I need clarification. We got 2 sets of documents. The one that you said you shared back on January 18th was not the redlined document. It was the partnership agreement with that. That's also the document that was shared with the Community Ed and Rec advisory, or the advisory board. It was not reviewed at the meeting since it had been really the first that we had seen it with that. So when I was studying these 2 documents, they're not the same. The redlined one has different information in, and so I'm curious with the dates on the documents. Also don't really indicate that one is dated October 24th that has more detail in it than the one that was signed, I believe, on December 13th. And so I have a lot of questions also about information that's been removed from the document and how the organization would function. I know that the legal document is one piece of it, but what the city brings to the table and what the school brings to the table, and Mr. Bresendine did a drawing of the 3 circles. This does not clarify to me what the city's going to do, or what the school is going to do, or what the middle of the circle is going to do. And so I'm not quite sure. We started with a group meeting, and we haven't had any more meetings. I know there are questions both from the community center standpoint and some of the other organizations. There's a lot of good things that happen with this entity. But what's it going to look like? Understand that part of the plan, if I read the red line document, is for the city basically to take back its buildings and be responsible for the actual functions of the buildings, including the parks. There is a statement in here about the park board, and so I have a lot of questions, and I'm not quite sure where to go to for information, because I think I've asked some of the school board members, and they're looking at it from the school side. I just don't think we've had a chance to look at it from the city side.
I would agree with one overall premise that you're stating is, does this document talk about the operations of the city and of the school? No, it does not. This is an agreement that establishes a working relationship, a partnership, as stated in the agreement. It does not, and it could not go into some of the detail as far as the operations that I think that you're inquiring about, and even into some of the budgetary type of questions. So some of those are not going to be addressed in this document. So I would agree with you there.
I may? Okay. The red line document does have some information in there about park boards and early childhood advisory council. It does reference dollars. It does reference a variety of things. So I hear what you're saying.
Right.
But I think the other reason, I think we took a look at this document with what do we want this organization to be?
Right.
And I don't think the legal document is telling us what we want it to be.
Okay. At this time, if Dr. Holm will indulge me, if you could maybe just give a brief overall statement from your point of view of what this document is trying to accomplish, maybe you can do a better job than me.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for inviting me here today. First of all, I would say that from a school district perspective, we very much appreciate the partnership that's been in place for 17 years. It was time to review and renew this agreement if we wanted to move forward. In looking at information I had available to me when I began to dig into this, I believe at a time that predated my arrival, a consultant was brought in, looked at the overall agreement, pointed out that there was a lot of confusion from the part of the Joint Powers Board as to what their role was, what their function was. And as I sent that to the school district attorney, he pointed out to me that really the Joint Powers Group should be identified as an advisory group only. The only powers they would ever have would be powers expressly delegated from you as a council or the school district school board. I'm unaware that you as a council maybe delegated anything. My board had not. So when we talked about the authority that group really has, they can't levy taxes, they can't enter contracts, they can't hire staff. And so really their nature was advisory, and it was our attempt to clear that up first and foremost. Additionally, as you watched Mr. Brisendine's presentation earlier here, you saw a number of aspects that were addressed that primarily are either a school district only function, such as pre-K or Cardinal Place, or a city only function, such as parks. Frankly, I don't think that the city park plans and development are a concern of a school board. Likewise, early childhood programs aren't really a concern of you as a council. So Mr. Holland is correct. The first step I think we undertook back in the summer was we sent notification to you as a council, and you sent notification to the school board that we were going to study this, but potentially that could serve as 12 months' notice to withdraw from the agreement if through discussion and study we found there was no longer a partnership that made sense. I think there's still a partnership that makes sense here. I think in terms of what the organization could look like and how things might look in the future, that committee, that advisory group will dig in, work with the director, and establish a vision for the programs that we hold in common and develop plans that can be carried out. I don't think we would address those in this type of agreement normally.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Holm, and I didn't get clarification on the red line document. It does have different components in it than the document that you signed. And so part of that talks about the kind of the delegating of what should stay in the agreement and what shouldn't be in the agreement. With that, and it references that. And I appreciate and I apologize that we haven't had the look at the documents that I know your school board and that you have, but I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to function. And if I read correctly too with what will be left for the advisory board to do, they've been an advisory board for a long time. That's their function. And if I understand correctly, we had a joint powers agreement that probably didn't actually legally function as a joint powers agreement. So we need to go to a partnership. I'm just saying that I think the city needs to decide what's going to stay in that agreement before we sign the agreement, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with that.
I would just point out to you that the approved document approved by our school board is the one you saw with my signature from December 13th. I guess the other thing I would ask you to think about is the timeline here gets a little bit difficult in that we're anticipating we may have a change in leadership in these programs, which would cause us to start to look for a new leader. If the agreement we have is in flux, I think that'll present a challenge to us in terms of recruiting. If we aren't real clear on what that's looking like. I guess I appreciate what you're saying, but I think that the one thing I tried to point out when Mr. Holland and I met with that advisory group was no one's taken any exception to any input they gave or decisions they've made or the work they've done. That advisory group has worked hard and been very diligent and very appropriate in their thinking. And so I wouldn't want anyone having the idea that from a school district perspective, we didn't appreciate them.
Thank you, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Holm. I agree with what you're saying from the timeline, but the report that we got here is, I want us to make sure we're doing the right thing. If we agree to do this, it should be more than 18 months. I know that the agreement is perpetual, but the way it was presented to us is, let's just agree to this, let's see what changes we can make, and see if, we've got the next 18 months to figure it out. And that's what I thought we had stepped back to look at, to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the community now. That's why I thought we'd given the 12-month notice for us to both step back and say, this is what we want this organization to be. And what I see now is a legal agreement, but I don't know what it means for the city.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I can offer my perspective a little bit on this. I've had occasion a few times over the last few years to look at this agreement, at your existing agreement. And I would agree with the assessment that it was confusing. On the one hand, it kind of went to the trouble of establishing a joint powers board, and that's normally done when you want to create a fully autonomous, separate legal entity that's going to operate some portion of your Parks and Rec system in this case. And then after creating the joint powers board, it essentially conferred none of that actual authority to act autonomously. So I know that a few times we've commented on the agreement saying that you should really pick which way you're going to go, either go all in on creating basically a separate joint powers entity that operates essentially autonomously. You'd still have ties to it through appointments and things. Or, scale back on how you've structured this and refer to it more as an advisory committee. And I know that the agreement before you is this district's and city's attempt to more clearly define the organization, and I think it's true to say to change the agreement to more accurately reflect the way the board has actually been running. It has been operating more as an advisory committee, and I'll give just an example of why these distinctions are important. If you have a specific piece of programming, say it's a youth athletic piece of programming, what entity is providing that programming? I think it's always been the city that's provided that specific program. It's not a separate, independent entity called Community Ed and Rec. It's actually a city program. It's certainly coordinated with the district and is based on recommendations from your CER board, but it's ultimately a city function that the city is responsible for. That's just one example, but the services are provided by the respective members to this agreement, not by an independent board that you've set up. So this agreement, I know, was an attempt to make it act more consistently, or excuse me, to have the agreement be more consistent with the way the parties have been acting. So that I think was the intent. As far as the different drafts, we reviewed and commented on a few, and I know that as Dr. Holm pointed out, the agreement that's signed by him dated December 13th is the agreement that's before you formally for consideration. The red line, I believe, might be an early draft that was exchanged between the parties as the discussions were starting. But I think the parties have moved beyond that, and they're presenting the second document to you for your consideration.
Thank you. Councilmember Meske.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Holland, Dr. Holm, for putting this together. I think it does a really good job of clarifying authority and where that needs to go, and I think that needed to happen. Just a question would be, you mentioned the parks going under the city, and you mentioned early childhood under school districts, and that these are natural places for them to go, where they were currently in this mess of an agreement. What are the other pieces that are moving? Because I need to know what is now the city going to be responsible for that we formerly relied on the joint powers to do. And if those are the only two, so be it. But are there other pieces that are being shifted back from that were in this confusion piece?
Well, I think one council person, Meske, would be the ABE, Adult Basic Ed, for instance, really, again, is a school function, it's an education function, it's a consortium of 10 school districts. Again, to think joint group from the city of Willmar and Willmar Public Schools would have any kind of decision-making when it's a consortium of 10 would be an example. Cardinal Place would be another. I guess Mr. Holland may need to address your question regarding city items that are shifting. I guess I would maintain that those always have been city and school district concerns and functions and somehow ended up in this agreement.
I would answer it this way. Currently, since my arrival, the mowing of the parks, that's the city. The cleaning of the parks, that's the city. The trash, it's the city. The improvements, the city. So the buildings and the facilities that we have, that's not going to change by this agreement. It's our buildings, it's our responsibilities, and the only difference is that, right now, Mr. Brizendine has been responsible for the programming at, some of our buildings and parks, along with some of the capital projects and his input on the maintenance. And one of the things that I've talked about is that when we get a new person later in the year, that we may look at some, roles that they do. But as far as the city, nothing changes. We still, have those responsibilities.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add
Mr. Brizendine.
to those comments, I think they've pretty well captured. What I would add is the fact that each entity carries its own budget. So the school district's got its own budgeted items related to many of the things Dr. Holm spoke about. And as for the city that programming and budgets that I've been responsible for are around just what Mr. Holland said. The main budget area that I think was part of this merger is the leisure service budget, which is in essence the recreation program. So I think to get to Mr. Meskey's point is what's going to be a part of this in the future and has always been a part of it for the near 18 years that we've been collaborating is the programming pieces. So around enrichment, around recreation, around activities for adults, around activities for children, that's what the bulk of this has always been. The community center has its own standalone budget, and in this year's budget for the city, there's some resources to put some staffing changes out at that facility. The Civic Center is a standalone budget item. Those are two examples of areas that I've had responsibilities for, not throughout the whole 18 years, but the bulk of the 18 years that we've been a partnership. The Aquatic Center is the other of the 4 budget areas that I've had responsibilities for. So I think what we're trying to capture in this new arrangement, and as I look to step aside, trying to refocus this position into the programming pieces and the enrichment and recreational programming for all ages is, I think, what we'd be looking at mostly in this arrangement.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I don't know if Council Member Nelson's question about the 18 months in the agreement was addressed. I would simply say that I think the reason we looked at 18 months versus 3 years, which has been the standard review cycle for the first review, is because we are looking at a different agreement and we may want to adjust some things and tweak some things, and waiting 3 years to go through a review again might not be prudent in that a lot of things change in 3 years.
Councilmember Osmus.
Thank you. Were you taking doing some type of a study as to changes that might take place with Mr. Brizendine's retirement and how that position maybe could operate differently?
We have not yet at this point, but we, I'm sure we'll be looking at the job description as we move forward and considering those aspects.
Okay. I thought I had heard that there was some kind of a study being done. Okay.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. Sorry, because some of the questions I'm asking are specifically city questions, so I appreciate your comments. So with that, I know that when I've served on that advisory board long enough to know that your side is pretty much got line by line and funded that way with managers on each level. And I guess what I'd like to see the city side do is, if we're taking back some of the administration of the parks and we're taking back some of the administration of the other buildings, I guess I'd like to see a proposal of how that budget figures are going to look from our side and what's actually going to stay in the community ed and rec. And I think that's a city thing. That's something you can't answer. It's a question, and I think it's also a frustration for the advisory board to try to understand what their role is going to be and who's going to do those pieces. Who's going to do park planning? Who's going to do those things? Because some of the people that are at that table want to do those things, and it feels like what we're proposing is not going to stay there anymore. When we got some figures on budgets last week, and if I added them up correctly, we've got about $1.5 million that are under auditorium, leisure services, and I just would like to understand from the city side how we're going to do this before we continue on, and to understand what's going to be in there to enhance the services that community ed and rec have been doing. So that's my issue.
Okay. If there's no other questions, from my side of it, Dr. Holm, thank you for being here. I'm not sure that I'll have any questions for you. If you wish to stay there, you can, but if you'd like to sit down, that'd be fine as well. Okay. When I look at the agreement, it's very clear the tasks that staff do on the school side. But the tasks that are done on the city side, it's very confusing. And when we take a look at the delineation of the dollars and the applying the dollars to each of the different categories. And I think most on the council are aware that, and I think the number is about right around $770,000 are sitting in that account now. And we have to decide where do those dollars get applied. And if you take a look at Mr. Brizentine's time spent equally between the school and equally between, and this is a theory, this is not fact, and that's why I'm bringing it up. If it's, in fact, he spends half of his time with the city and half of his time with the school district. And then when we see all of these boxes checked over on the right side for the school, and then on the city side, duties as assigned, and I know it's more than that, Steve, I'm not trying to sound as tough on you as I am, but, it doesn't seem like it adds up. It doesn't seem like we're getting the bang for the buck. And as Dr. Holmes said, I think that we have a good project here. It has been good for the last 17 years. I'm just not sure, when we look at the dollars and cents of it, and we look at what needs to be done in our parks and what needs to be done in programming at the community center, Councilman Erasmus, you brought that up regularly, what needs to happen out there. I don't think there's a whole lot of school buildings that are open running programs with nobody there. And we have that happening regularly with our city buildings. And so there's a price tag associated with that. And, Steve, thanks you for, Mr. Okins, thank you for getting those financial numbers to us, but you try to whittle those down and try to actually break them down and find out exactly where they are. It's confusing. So I personally am not ready to move this forward to the council meeting tonight. I think we have more questions that need to be answered. And I think we have to have some of these answers before we're going to be in a position to make the determination. And the way it's in front of us right now, I'm not sure that I would be in favor of it. So, but I don't think we're ready to move it to the council for tonight. I don't know if that spurs any more questions, or if there's council members that wish to move it forward tonight, we certainly can do that, but it's up to you. Okay, next item on the agenda is cable access technician. Mr. Smaby.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, what you have in front of you is a CAR form requesting full-time employment for the cable access technician. Currently is a 32-hour per week position, and With this, we'd move him up to full-time employment status at 40 hours per week, plus his pay range would get moved from a 4 to a 5 based upon the additional duties that the job would entail. Also, there's an updated job description, and this would also include a lateral over from the RAC department to the IT department.
Okay, so there's a request from staff to increase the hours, and my understanding is the budgeting will come out of the cable access fee, and there are adequate funds there to handle that, is that correct?
I believe that, yeah, the funds would come from the general budget at that, and that funding should be adequate.
The answer is yes. I mean,
Yes.
that's where we get the funds to support that. But go ahead, Steve.
Mr. Oakland?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the cable access fee is a revenue that is already recognized in the general fund. So this would need to be an adjustment as any contract settlements that are forthcoming in 2018 as well, out of the general fund.
Councilmember Minsky?
The additional duties that are quoted here, from website administration, maintenance, administration of multiple government, social media, media site, and video productions for the city, are those currently not being done, or are these going to be gains that the position will have, or is this augmenting other pieces?
He's currently doing most of this, but it would be expanded out, plus there's a lot more video production and city productions that we would hope to do in the future based on full-time employment.
One of the things our city administrator wants to do is have a greater presence on the social media side, and this would give us the ability to have that greater presence.
The difference between a pay grade 4 to a 5, is that enough by augmenting things that we're already doing to add more hours to it?
I believe so, yes.
And this has been scored, is that correct?
That's correct.
Councilmember Nelson, followed by Alvarado.
Thank you. Just a clarification, when we had the, kind of the annual report from the cable, I know there was a conversation that we had cut back some hours. So this will fill in those hours that were cut over there to help cover different events in the community.
That's correct. Video filming for some events was limited due to lack of hours, so this would help fill that in.
Okay, so in the past, we had trouble covering the holidays parade, and I don't think we ever didn't televise the parade, the Willmar Fest parade. I think it was always televised, but there was conversation once that it might not be televised. That would bring all of this back, correct?
What this would mostly bring back would be sporting events, local sporting events that we usually record ourselves, and again, due to lack of hours, some of that was scaled back. The parades, we've typically been able to keep those produced, so.
Okay, but we had 1 year we didn't do the parade, the holiday.
That's correct, due to lack of staff, yes.
Councilmember
Thank you,
Alvarado.
Mr. Mayor. Is this the correct title for this position? It seems like there's going to be a lot of social media, and I don't know what the correct title would be. Is he going to be involved with that much cable? I mean,
It'd be around 50%, I'd say, IT, social media, website production, and probably around 50% cable production still. We did explore the option of changing the job description title, but ultimately just decided to keep it on the books as the cable access technician.
Councilmember Mansky. I'm sorry, you done?
yes.
Councilmember Mansky. You're written down here, I'm not sure. I looked at my list and I went, oh man, how did I miss him? But, okay. Then I would assume that if the council does approve this, that then you'd have a revised date on the job description after the council approved it, correct?
That'd be correct.
Council, they are also requesting this to be moved forward for tonight to the council meeting. Do we want to move it forward to the council meeting, or would we like to hold it over? I think it's, from talking with Mr. Holland on Thursday, it's imperative we get this position filled. There are gaps that are not being covered currently, and that would allow them to do that, so.
Yes.
Okay, we'll move it forward to the full agenda, so.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Okens, our Finance Director, is going to do a fund balance policy review. This is something that we've been requesting for quite some time, and I think we've finally gotten to the point where I think we maybe have asked the right questions. So, Mr. Okens, I don't know, I had a document in front of me. There it is. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this comes before you, if the council remembers, when the city auditor came before you, he had made some comments about the level of fund balance that the city had as it related to the state auditor's recommendation as far as fund balances go. He stated that the city's fund balance was at 100%. The state auditor's recommendations are somewhere between 35 to 50%. One of the items that I will touch on a little bit tonight, and we'll have further discussion at later meetings, is the semantics on what portion of the fund balance are both auditors referring to. The state auditor is referring to an unrestricted fund balance of 35 to 50%. The city's fund balance is a total fund balance, which terminologies and governmental accounting did a revamping of terminologies about 5 years ago to try to standardize terminologies for reporting purposes so that cities could compare one another as far as like terminologies. So 5 years ago, the city adopted basically a fund balance policy, and in that used the terminologies that were sent out, and that included a number of terminologies from restricted, unrestricted, assigned, committed, and non-spendable. I mean, and so I'll try to summarize it tonight and not get into too much detail as far as those terminologies go. But there was some concern by the council that the city had a number of fund balances more than what the state auditor has recommended. So with that, Mr. Mayor, the general fund, there's a number of fund balances and a number of information that I supplied to you. I included a copy of the city's current fund balance policy. In that, it starts on page 38 of your electronic version for those that are following electronically, and it runs through page 45. We also included footnotes from our comprehensive financial report. And again, that starts electronically on page 45. We included the 2018 mayor's proposed budget summary pages, and I do apologize, there was a corrected copy of the general fund at your workstations. A working copy, as we go through the process, was inerrantly submitted to you. So the one that you have tonight is the correct one. We also included section 5 of the city charter, which talks about the stabilization fund. And we included correspondence, as I mentioned earlier, about the city and state auditors and their recommendations and those types of things. So with that, Mr. Mayor, the general operating fund for 17 is $14.3 million, and in 18 it was $14.5 million. Of that audited fund balance at the end of 16, and we're using 16 because we are in the process of reconciling and closing 17 at this point. These are known numbers that are in your financial statements, and we do have a listing of those in your electronic packet. So if you compare the 16 fund balance to the operating budgets, it is true that the city has about 100% of the operating budget in our fund balance. Of that 14 million, and 7.6 million is really unassigned. All of the city's fund balance of the 14.4 million really is classified as unrestricted. The requirement of unrestricted versus restricted is if there's an outside source that requires the city to take that portion of the fund balance and obligate it. There is no outside source obligating any of the city's fund balance. The only restriction that you see here as far as unassigned and committed is by the city council themselves. The fund balance that the city has is policy requires an annual review. The last review that the city had was in July of 16. Some of that, I would guess, has kind of fallen through the cracks with administration changes and those types of things. We do look at the fund balances when we're working on the budget. We do supply the mayor those, and included in your packet, you'll notice that in the budget summary forms, you also get a copy of those as well. The unassigned fund balance portion is broken down the three categories that you see on the board. The working capital, which is $4 million. The city spends $4 million more from January through the end of June than it takes in. This is just in the general operating fund now that we're talking about. So in order to make the payments without borrowing money, the city would need $4 million in the bank to make those payments. Self-insurance is an amount that past councils have set up, $1 million. This has allowed the city to increase our deductible amount and get a dividend back from the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust. We have just received back $90,000 in workman's comp premiums for the past 5 years claims, somewhat due to this reserve that's set up. The stabilization fund of $2.6 million, that is, again, a charter allowed amount, not required, of 10% of your operating budget for the current year and the subsequent year. That amount we have looked at in the past as far as is that amount needed. There are two things I'd like to comment on that. The first of all is that this amount has been at this level since 1995, and I do have a slide later in the presentation that talks to that. It has not been used. From the years 2008 through 2011, the state did unallotments to the cities. The unallotment was when they had told the city they were going to give them so much local government aid, and after the year had already started, had unallotted that. One year it was $760,000. The council at that time chose to cut back on capital improvements, which we are dealing with today, instead of using the stabilization fund to cover that shortfall and then replenish it over a period of time that they have the option to do. I mentioned that the state auditor's guidelines mentions 35 to 50% of unrestricted. I think that's where some of the confusion lies, is unrestricted versus unassigned. Unrestricted is an outside source, again, is the only time that you can restrict funds. Again, I mentioned the city charter allows up to 10% of the operating budget to be set aside for current and subsequent budgets. The city has had this level since 1995, has not used it. Again, the examples of 2008 to 2011 would be the only time that we would have possibly needed to do that. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'd happy to answer any questions. I know there's a lot of information in here that you have electronically. It will be coming back to you in a revised form. We are working with the city auditors in conversations to bring back a resolution annually to the council after the year is reconciled, and that would give guidance to the mayor when he works in his upcoming budget process. In your packet, if I could just direct you to page 45 electronically of your packet, that is the summary of the accounts breakdowns that I had mentioned earlier. We have reconciled a couple of those where there'll be $80,000 going back available for the 19 budget. We have done preliminary 2017 numbers due to a number of unfilled positions that we incurred in 16 and 17. The preliminary unaudited numbers are in the range of about $1 million excess revenues over expenditures. And those are unaudited, unreconciled at this point. They'll be coming to you in the next 2 months.
And then how about capital?
The capital, we are still reconciling with invoices. The departments had until the end of January to get their invoices into the finance department.
And those look favorable?
Those are favorable, yes.
Well, Council, this is something that we've been asking for, and thank you, Steve, for preparing it. Thank you for providing the corrected version. Questions from Council? Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you started out defining or noting that the auditor's definition is different than what we have been considering as a definition for unrestricted or whatever. Can you tell us what dollar amount, if we use the auditor's definition, what dollar amount do we have in-house and what would be 50% of what he would consider
Unrestricted?
correct?
50% of that would be about the 7.2 million. Because the entire amount for the city at this point is considered unrestricted. There's a number that, is committed. The amount that you see under the committed portion of 6.8 is primarily dealing with contractual obligations where employees may have left sick leave with the city, vacation, or the early buyout program that the city has presently in place. Those would be considered in the committed dollar amount. So 7.2 million of the fund balance would be considered unrestricted because the full amount is unrestricted.
And again, by using his definition, what do we actually have in-house dollars? We're at-
Using his definition of unrestricted would be 7.2, 50%. The 14.4 million is unrestricted
Okay.
in the general operating fund.
So how about combined between unrestricted and unassigned?
The unassigned amount, if you look at section, if I can just find it real quick here. It's in your fund balance policy, and it would be on page 40 electronically in your handouts. Page 3 of the fund balance present policy lists the 4 million, the 7.6 million. And it breaks those three out as I listed on the slide.
Didn't mean to step in and ask a question, but I was trying to get to.
In our review of that unassigned classification, we would probably be coming back to you for a reclassification of that because past councils have assigned that by action. And so 5 years ago when we were transitioning to the new terminologies, there needs to be some additional work on looking at these numbers and looking at the definitions and coming back to you with a recommended change.
Did you get your answer?
That's fine, go ahead.
Okay, Councilmember Nelson.
There was an email in here, Steve, from our auditor that talks about the minimum fund balance of 50%, but then the next sentence says, I don't recommend going down to the 50% because I think it would cause budgeting issues in the future. I just wondered if you had a comment on, it kind of conflicts with one sentence to the next. I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
I have had conversations with the auditor asking for clarification of that. The 50%, since there's some confusion about the terminology and that all of the city's fund balance is unrestricted, the amount of cash flow is a minimum amount that the city should have on hand in order to pay bills. And then it really falls back to the council from there going upwards on what you want to take action to designate or assign. And that will be coming back to you in about 2 months when the 2017 numbers are finalized. We will explain the items that are listed in your sheet that is listing the comprehensive financial on page electronic 45 where it lists all of the fund balance amounts. We'll have a prepared resolution asking you if you want to maintain certain fund balances or not, or assign them. That's one thing that has lacked in the past as far as it's been done during the budgeting process, but his recommendation would be to bring one back based on the policy and have the council actually take action and discuss it.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for your report. More information for us to dwell on here, and thank you for that. With that, we'll stand adjourned for the work session. For those who wish to speak during the public forum of the regular meeting, the city clerk has the sign-up sheet. You can go to her, and she will get your information from you.